Hello, and welcome back to the Can You Dig It podcast, where we dig down, dig deep, and dig in to the process of self-discovery and personal growth. I'm Jordan Knock from the Center for Alignment. I'm here with Jessica Ribello from Unleash Potential Life Coaching, and we're bringing you 2+ decades of both counseling and coaching experience to this podcast, which explores both the theory, but more importantly, the application of subjects in personal growth, emotional awareness, and mental health. Today's episode, anxiety. This is going to be the first in a series of anxiety episodes we're doing. Jessica, when somebody comes into a session with you and they are having issues with anxiety, where do you go? Where do you start? How do you explain it to them? I mean, let's imagine they're completely lost and confused and, I've never experienced it before. So where would you go?
So my first step is I usually label it with them. And like my identification of anxiety, which might be different than yours and other people's, I identify it as it's fear of the unknown, and it's very future based, right? Like we don't know what is going to happen within 5 minutes, or we don't know what's going to happen at my presentation, or we don't know what's going to happen with my relationship. So it brings up all these unknown feelings, sensations, and thoughts, but our body usually responds when it feels uncomfortable because it's unknown. So that's when like your cheeks might get red, your hands might get really clammy, you might have like a little pit in your stomach because it's your body kind of saying like, I don't really know about this. This is new. This is different. This feels uncomfortable to me.
And I wouldn't say that I have anxiety, but I've felt those feelings before. So what would the difference be between anxiety per se and just being nervous or being uncomfortable? I mean, I've spoken in front of crowds, God knows how many times, but I still get clammy and nervous before, not like I used to, but a little bit angsty, heart's beating a little, I'm tight, I may be clammy or sweating. So what's the difference between, me, who doesn't think he has anxiety, and the person who comes in and says, I'm dealing with a lot of anxiety and this is what it looks like?
Well, then there's also like the cognitive piece that comes with it, and your thought processes that come along with those feelings, right? And like a lot of people who have anxiety and who are diagnosed with anxiety or not diagnosed, but just feel all of the, criteria to be diagnosed, your thoughts are oftentimes also scrambled, right? And like I call it like scrambled thoughts because sometimes we have thoughts that either don't make sense or thoughts that we like can't connect to something, right? They're like the worried thoughts or the unrealistic thoughts. It's like, I know this will never happen, but this is still a thought that I'm thinking about. And even though I can be realistic in saying this will never happen, it's still preventing me from having like a clear mind to then go through the situation.
Interesting. Okay. So the difference then would be like the mental approach in that moment for me is, no, I'm focused on rehearsing what I'm supposed to be saying. I'm ready. I'm talking myself into it, as opposed to, oh my God, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. I'm going to fail. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? What happens if this? What if I sneeze? What if I fart on stage? What, et cetera, et cetera. Right?
Correct.
So
correct. Because all of those what ifs, think about it, right? Like even as you were saying it, you probably felt your heart increase too. What if I sneeze? What if I fart? What if I trip? What if I, right? Like it panics us. Our thoughts panic us.
Right.
And when we get panicked, we're not in the moment. You're not then thinking about, okay, this is what I need to do to give this presentation right now. Okay, this is slide 1 and I need to start with slide 1 and I need to be calm and regulated and then I go forward. No, you're in your head the whole time. So if you're in your head the whole time and you're living up there, playing out all these what ifs or worst case scenarios, that's scrambled. It's your scrambled thoughts. You're losing a grip of what you're then doing in that moment.
So you would call that anxiety, or you're calling that the act or pattern of mental, or you're calling that the mental pattern that leads to anxiety? I'm just trying.
Yeah, I think that's the.
I'm sorry. And the reason I'm asking is because where I go with anxiety is it's a physiological thing. If someone says I have anxiety, I'm thinking, how do you know you have anxiety? Well, and they're going to say, because I feel this, I feel this, I feel this, I feel this. So I'm going to the feeling, right? The physiological representation of anxiety when I ask you that question, I guess.
And I guess talking it out loud, I go more to the thought. Like, what are your thoughts? If we were tracking your thoughts or looking at your thoughts, like, what are they? Are they worry-based thoughts? Are they unrealistic thoughts? Are they the what if game? Because the what if game is always getting us into trouble, or the should game. Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I not do that? Right? Like, they're very they're almost like insecure thoughts. Like, we don't necessarily know what to trust within our thoughts. So they're spiraling, they're going everywhere.
Right.
Whereas
And
I guess
anytime,
for you, I'm
go ahead.
sorry, I just cut you off. I guess for you, it's like, okay, well, prove to me, how do you know you have anxiety? What is it? Right? Like, I guess it sounds like you're a little bit more like matter of fact than I guess my approach is.
Yeah, I focus a lot on the tangible stuff, and you're focusing more on the intangible thought process, which is good because we want to bring kind of both perspectives to this. Because some people like to engage the mental part of things, some people like to engage the behavioral part of things. For me, and just in my experience with clients, with myself, I go to that physical or physiological place because it seems to be more empowering for people. This is
Mm-hmm.
something I can immediately start changing today,
Mm-hmm.
right? By focusing on dot, 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 or making a
Mm-hmm.
habit of every day looking at dot, 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 which is also mental as I say it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
like, how do I know what to face, right? If my anxiety is a product of a pattern of avoidance, let's say, throughout my day, throughout my life, because I'm feeding my mind and I'm feeding my reality that I'm creating. All of this fear
Mm-hmm.
based, right? This foundation of fear is where I'm coming from, whether it's with a thought, a word, or an action. That's what's creating this feeling of anxiety in me. So, but it's like the thoughts and the actions are going to go hand in hand.
Oh, well, of course.
Let's be
Of
real.
course.
So,
And then when you have the thoughts, the actions, then your body usually steps in too. It's like, oh, hey, I'm here. This is how I'm reacting within the circumstances that you're giving me.
right. And like you said, if it's insecure, right? When
Mm-hmm.
someone says insecure, I think of the word unsafe, not secure, not safe.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
not safe, which means I need to be on edge to be able to fight or flight when the time comes.
Correct.
So my heart is pounding, the adrenaline's ready to flow, hands are clammy, as if, I know I may be cornered by a saber-toothed tiger at any moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a difference between actually being cornered by the saber-toothed tiger and having a quote unquote panic attack,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or going into fight or flight mode as if my life is in danger. I think we'll get more into panic attacks and the acute stuff,
Yeah.
because you can speak so much to the trauma side of things and how that gets conditioned in us. And so I think we'll go more into that in episode 2 in this
Yeah.
series for sure. But okay. So we have kind of these two approaches, right? We have this mental and we have this more behavioral approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, if you were talking to a client, how would you look at it with them? You said you would label the anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
When you say label it, you're labeling the specific thought patterns. What are you labeling there?
So a lot of our thoughts have a common theme to them, right? And it's pretty easy if you start, if you ask the client, like, okay, what are the thoughts? Well, the thought is, I have a fear of public speaking. That's thought number one. And thought number two is, everyone in the crowd is going to think I'm stupid. And the other thought is, I'm going to fail at this. I'm never going to be able to give my presentation, right? We have like three thoughts there.
Right.
And together we could say, like, there's a fear of failure. That's like a common theme between the three of those thoughts.
Okay.
So then that's like the main thought then you work with, right? It's the theme of the majority of the thoughts. And of course, there could be 1,000 other thoughts that I didn't give as an example. That could be a fear of failure. But then it's like, okay, what does a fear of failure mean? Say that happened to you right now. What would you do? Your worst fear ever happened right now. You failed. What would happen? Right? I'm very extreme when I talk about it because, like, I want to talk about the possible worst case scenario. So then that's not an unknown thought anymore. Then we gave language
Gotcha.
to it. We spoke through it. We talked it out. And it's like, okay,
Sure.
we're a little bit more prepared now. It's almost like an exposure therapy type thing, right? Like, we're a little bit more prepared for this thought. It's not such an insecure thought anymore. And then past that, it's like, So, and I think I've said this in other podcasts too, like a lot of my work I bring back to the body, because I feel like if we miss what our body is telling us, like we're only doing half of the equation, right? Like I feel like our body is its own vessel and it has a message to tell us. And like, it's also our responsibility to listen to the message of our bodies.
Okay.
So,
And I think that's a huge part of what we need to focus on, especially today when we talk about, right, the application of
mhm,
either coping with, preventing, truly fully understanding and simplifying anxiety. At the end of it, between the mental and the behavioral, right, you're bringing it to the body, because what it all
mhm,
comes down to at the end of the day is I'm feeling, quote unquote, feeling anxiety.
mhm,
And we only
mhm,
feel things within the body. I can't say I'm
mhm.
feeling something that has not, no relation to my body,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
so I want to get into the body for sure. I want to touch on something you said though. So it sounds like when you find the common fear or the common insecurity, that common place of where there's no safety. I'm afraid I'm going
Mhm,
to fail, let's say, in that example. It's like we know labels keep us safe. They help us, even if they don't actually understand it fully, they
mhm.
trick us into thinking we do. So when we're able to label and compartmentalize or even simplify something, it does go a very long way for our brain in feeling safe. That's for sure.
Mhm.
That is for sure. Um, so when you talk about labeling, I can understand like how that can be so effective. Same with when we're talking mindfulness and emotional awareness, we say name it to tame it. What are you feeling?
Mhm.
And if you can say I'm feeling a tightness in my chest, well,
Mhm.
you're already empowering yourself to not be a victim of your anger in that moment.
Because you're also you have a voice to it then.
There's a voice, there's a name, there's an understanding. This is where it's at. It's located here, not spiraling all around me. Right.
Mhm.
I'm in control because I'm able to label and pinpoint and simplify it. So that's huge. Then you moved into facing it, facing the
Mhm.
worst case scenario, facing the fears. And that's something that, and I know you know this and wouldn't do this blindly with everybody, because there are some people that can't, or they go to
Handle
think
that.
about it or face it and they start going into panic mode,
Mhm.
right? They can do it, but it's so terrifying for them. We would never want to just go there blindly. So if you are,
Mhm.
if you're listening and you're someone with an extreme amount of anxiety and constant panic attacks, you don't just want to blindly listen to us and face the worst case scenario necessarily. I mean, if you're willing, I mean, you're allowed to, but you might want to find
Caution.
someone that can, as you said, exposure therapy, like work your way through different levels and intensities of exposure. What's what we
Mhm.
systematic desensitization, I think, is what we
Mhm.
call in the field. So I think that's just important to highlight too. Like it's different for different people.
Oh, absolutely. And it's different on also what the worries are, right? Like different
Oh,
worries are going to require us to do a different approach for different people.
right.
But I think a big part of like the beginning steps of how to understand your anxiety and learn about it and then start tackle it is a lot of like the labeling, giving a voice to it, noticing where it is in the body. And like I often tell people too, it's like, where do you feel your anxiety? Oh, I feel it in my chest. Well, what does it feel like? I don't know. Well, think about it. What is it like? I push on these, right? Think about it. What does it feel like? Well, it feels like I have a brick sitting on my chest. Great. What material is the brick made out of? What color is the brick? How much do you think it weighs, right? Like I will go into the specifics of exactly what the body feels like, because then that client then could close their eyes and they could visualize exactly how the anxiety is manifesting within them.
Mhm.
And then we're making it known. Then it's not this like unknown big scary monster inside of us that we don't know
Mhm.
what to do with. Then it's like, all right, it's this brick on my chest. Then we could go into a little bit of the application of like, well, what do you think you need to remove the brick, right? Like what would feel good to get this brick off of you,
Mhm.
right? And then we'll talk application. And then obviously there's more stuff to go on after that just to like prevent the anxiety from coming in the first place. But obviously we're not at that point yet.
Right. Right. So this will be a good segue, and I'm going to talk a lot about the preventive part of things. But I want you, because it's a good segue to go into more the body and what mindfulness has done for the field of anxiety in general. I also want to touch upon the fact that we both referred to the fear of farting on stage as if it was nothing, and neither of us giggled when talking about farting, which I think it's necessary that we do. We got to keep it light. We got to keep it light. So,
Thanks for noticing that one.
Yeah, of course. I literally wrote it down, highlight farting, like on my page here, 'cause I'm 7 years old at heart.
I was gonna say, you're acting your age.
Right. Listen to me. I'm a professional. And then I make a farting noise and giggle. Yeah, real nice. Real nice. But in the same respect, if you're going to learn, right, self-awareness and personal growth from someone, wouldn't you want to learn it from someone who knows how to have a lot of fun? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
I would,
Yes.
that's just me.
Yes.
Or it's my way of rationalizing my immaturity and hoping that people don't stop listening because I'm so stupid. One or the other. One or the other.
That's a new episode. That's another topic.
Whole other episode. In March, look for the farting episode.
Yeah, we don't have time. We don't have time to go into that.
So to bring us back before we spiral too far off here, you talked about bringing it to the body.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we want to go to the body?
So the body is responsible for, I guess, enabling our thoughts or shutting down our thoughts. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. But if we have a thought and our body starts reacting to that thought, then we're enabling the thought, we're growing the thought, or feeding it, right? And I use this phrase all the time with my clients. It's watch what you feed, because what you feed is what you grow. We don't really necessarily want to grow some of these insecure thoughts.
Okay.
So I go back to the body, and then specifically in the body is our vagus nerve. I talk a lot about the vagus nerve, and what the vagus nerve is go back for a minute. The word vagus in Latin means wander. So the vagus nerve is known as the wandering nerve in our body. And why it's known as that, it's because it has multiple branches that split into two thick stems. One's rooted in your brainstem and then in your cerebellum. And then from there, it wanders throughout your body, through your abdomen, and then touching your heart, and then touching all of your other organs along the way. So it really is the connector through everything, but it wanders throughout the body. Now, once I explain this to people, some people think I'm just nutty, and they're okay, Jess, whatever, too much info here. And some people are really intrigued by it because it's oh, I never knew that.
Right.
It's I tell people our vagus nerve sits right over here. So if you are somebody who is super anxious and you feel.
Explain when you said sits right over here, someone may be just on audio.
Oh, right on your chest.
Right on your chest bone, right there.
Right on your chest bone. Yep. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yep.
So if somebody's super, super anxious, the first thing I'll tell them to do is go get an ice pack from your freezer and just put ice on it. Just hold ice on it and breathe. That's all you have to do. Count your breaths if you want. You don't have to put too much thought to it, but breathe and just hold ice there. And naturally, your body is going to calm itself down. It's going to go back to regulating itself. And then if you think about it, we're then feeding breathing, right? We're feeding oxygen. We're not feeding these insecure thoughts. So the thought is going to dissipate a little bit.
Right, because we're focusing our mind and our actions on really relaxation and soothing, as opposed to reacting, trigger, emotion, threat, unsafe.
Exactly.
Along those lines. So, but why is this vagus nerve is it just because it's the central nerve that comes into play when anxiety is spoken about? Is it just the central nerve in general? Why the vagus nerve is what we're focused on? Why not
the vagus nerve?
Why not put the ice pack on my spinal cord? Why the vagus nerve?
I mean, I'm sure you can. I go more towards the vagus nerve just because it hits, like, it goes through all of your other central organs, right? From like your cerebellum to your brainstem to your heart to your abdomen and so on. And so like it hits everywhere. So it's more of like a full body approach,
Gotcha.
just because it literally wanders around your body.
Okay. And I know that this is not it's not something we're going to go too deep into the science of. That's not the point of this podcast. In fact, this podcast is pretty much the opposite. It's like, trust the science. Like, there's lots of research on this in general. Look it up. Here's the application. That's kind of where we go. So I don't want to go too deep into the science of it, but there is, I know that there's a huge amount of science. There's books on it now. I mean, every author who's writing about anxiety is pretty much talking about it. The nervous system and the vagus nerve and its role in anxiety. They are intricately connected, right? Correlation does not imply causation, but there's some serious correlation there that's been repeatable in experiments time and time again. So there's clearly a huge relationship there, and it's something worth looking at for sure. So when you talk about like putting the ice pack on the chest, feeding the self-soothing thoughts, the relaxation thoughts, that's coping. That's you're already feeling anxiety. You've noticed you're getting anxious. So here's how I have to act now. I have to calm my body down because my body thinks there's some real threat. Something's incredibly unsafe. And whether that's because I've been repeating the same thoughts over and over and over again and my mind believes it, or there actually is something real, like I have to go speak in front of people, or I'm about to go see family members I always fight with, or whatever, right? I have to have a deep conversation with a partner that always triggers me, something along those lines. So whatever it is, we're talking really like this is what you can do once triggered.
Correct. Once you label the anxiety, like this is one tool. And I have a lot of out of the box tools that I recommend people to try. And I specifically say the word try. Like my rule of thumb is like try each tool at least 3 times before you tell me it doesn't work.
Okay.
Because a lot of times,
can you talk about some of those tools so people have them?
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of times they are very, I guess, strange. Some people would say like, Jess, that would never work. And it's like, that's not valid. We haven't tried it. Try it 3 times and then come back and we'll talk about it. So another tool is like still going with the ice thing is, so I tell people to get an ice cube that everyone probably has in their home and like to put it on the palm of their hands and put the ice cube and leave it there until it melts all the way. And what I want you to do is I want you to focus on the melting ice cube. And I want you to focus on that part of your palm getting really cold. And I want you to notice how fast the ice cube is melting or how slow it's melting, right? I want you to notice all things about this ice cube. And what that is doing is that's grounding, but that's also changing part of your body temperature because it's a freezing ice cube that's now melting, right? Like your palm is actually cold right now, but it's grounding. But again, it gets you out of your head and into the moment.
Right. So it's the mind and the body that you're engaging by doing that.
Correct. And anything with anxiety, when you're already activated within your anxiety, you have to get out of your head. Your head is not helpful anymore because your head is giving you all of these insecure thoughts that spending any more time up there is probably not productive right now. Instead, try some of these tools, take a break from being in your head. Then you can go back to thinking about it. By then you might have a different perspective or you might feel a little bit more centered, that your thoughts might be a little bit more organized.
Right. And people, anyone who's a human being can relate to this. For all the aliens listening, sorry, this doesn't apply to you. But when we're triggered, when we have a serious feeling or emotion or that feeling of anxiety, let's say, the mind follows suit. Right. So yes, our thought patterns impact and create our emotions, but it also happens in reverse where our emotions can also really feed and impact the way the mind goes. We know that the mind can spiral from an emotion. So you're saying once that emotion's already triggered, once the feeling is already triggered physiologically, the anxiety in you is triggered, engage the body. That is the best thing you can do. Right. And if it's not the ice
Correct.
cube we're focusing on, focus on what you're feeling and where you're feeling it. And you can say it out loud or in your head. You say to yourself, okay, my heart is pounding. Okay, I'm sitting, I'm slowing my breath, but my heart is still pounding. My heart is still beating very fast. Okay, slow down. I'm breathing slowly. My heart is still pounding very fast. Like it, just as simple as that. I'm engaging because that's all I can think about is my heart is going like this and fluttering. So
Correct.
rather than avoid it or run from it, I'm just facing it.
Yeah, correct. And then one other tool that I want to recommend in today's podcast, and then there's others that we'll go through in the future podcast episodes, just because it relates so much with the ice cube one, is I tell people to get like the most sour candy they could possibly get. And my go-to is always like Warheads in my head, right? Because like as a kid, those were like deathly. So I tell buy sour candies, or you could use the cinnamon candy too, but sour candies I think work a little bit better. And when you're feeling super anxious, put a sour candy in your mouth. Now what this does is it's going to produce more saliva. So when we're super anxious, 9 out of 10 times we have dry mouth, because that's our sympathetic nervous system saying that we're in danger, kind of like the fight or flight that you were discussing a little bit earlier.
Right.
So you put a sour candy in your mouth and you start to salivate. It's regulating your sympathetic nervous system. So your nervous system starts to calm down just because you're producing saliva. Now, if you don't have a sour candy, if I asked you right now, like, Jordan, produce saliva in your mouth, you can make more saliva. We all have that ability. Or if you like slowly sip water, you could produce more saliva. The sour candy, though, it also gives you something else to focus on, right? Like you start to then focus on like, oh my God, this is so sour. Like, this is so sour. This is terrible. This tastes horrible. Why am I trying? Right. Like,
so
you have
again,
all
it's
those
the
thoughts.
mind and the body. It's
correct.
Right.
Correct.
Your mind is now attending to this intense physiological sensation. And it's also, I guess, adjusting a physiological sensation that's normally deeply intertwined with the feeling of anxiety and making it the opposite of what happens when there's anxiety. So that makes a lot of sense. I like that. I like that a lot. I also love Sour Patch Kids and Warheads, so I'm loving this.
Yeah. Oh no, Warheads are rough. I can't.
I'm gonna test this 400 times later when I'm watching TV.
400. Perfect. 400. That sounds really regulated.
Warheads.
Done. Do not call me when you have a stomach ache. It is not my fault.
Right, and I blame you. You told me to try this.
You said try this.
That's
but no, truly, the rule of thumb though with all these things that I know we spoke about, like ice in the middle of your chest, the ice cube melting on your palm, and then a sour candy, is like, rule of thumb is try it 3 times before you decide that it's not helpful. And I also tell people, like, don't do all of these things at the same time, because you're not going to then know what's actually helpful or not helpful. Like, say, like, okay, we're just going to start with the sour candies first.
Right.
And I will try that 3 times. And if that's not helpful, then I know that just the sour candies alone were not helpful, before saying like everything's no good.
Right. And in general, like everything else in life too, until you're relatively adept at something, you can't really know how effective you are at it, or how effective it is, or how likely you are to engage in that behavior, I guess, let's say. So you're not going to remember, if you're in not fight or flight mode, but if you're anxious, your mind is not going to be thinking, okay, what do I need to do to navigate this safely? Like, you're not thinking that. You're flustered. You're all over the place. So we want to ideally be practicing it or have reminders for it outside of us, if anxiety is something we deal with, on the norm, because otherwise it's really hard to remember. We do want to prime ourselves to be in a position to navigate the anxiety effectively and self-soothe appropriately, right? And calm the body down. And then the more we do that, the more we show our body, you don't need to keep going into this state. We're safe. We're okay. And it does work towards the future goal of preventing it completely and not having it, because you're not feeding it, right? I mean, it's like I'm really afraid, and now I'm feeling anxious. I'm afraid of so many things, and now I'm anxious, so I'm going to avoid these feelings as much as I can. and then you feel even more anxious. Now I'm feeding fear more fear. Is that
Yeah.
what, that's what I'm doing, and that's not working. So
No.
we have to start slowing down. We're so bad with time on this podcast.
I know.
We've gotten so deep into the coping aspect of when anxiety comes up and understanding that a little bit, which has been awesome. We wanted to get into prevention, which we just started to touch upon. And it looks like that's going to be episode 2's focus, really preventing anxiety altogether. How do I cure it? How do I transcend it completely? Because you can. I have clients who have. Me personally, I have transcended it completely. Does that mean I don't get nervous or quote unquote like anxious at times? Of course I do. It's the body's going to do that. But would I say that I have a diagnosis of anxiety where there's like marked dysfunction over a certain period of time in certain personal social settings, etc.? No, I absolutely don't. I absolutely don't, the way maybe I might have in the past when I was younger. So it's something I really want to get into. When it comes to prevention, a lot of it is really just simplifying and looking, just to tease you, whet your appetite for the next episode, like looking at how often I'm coming from fear with my creative tools, right? We're constantly creating our reality with our thoughts, our words, and our actions. That's the end. That's an empowered mindset. We're constantly creating our reality. So if my thoughts, my words, and my actions are coming from fear, I'm very likely to be creating an anxious reality, a fear-based reality, a reality where my brain thinks I'm in danger at all times because I'm hiding from everything. I'm running from everything. I'm avoiding everything. So look at that. Look at what you're avoiding. Look at what you're coming from fear with as best you can, and start facing things more consistently. And that's where discipline comes in. You're not going to feel like doing it. You're just going to have to do it. And that's courage in a nutshell. That's what life gives us. Life gives us opportunities for courage. It doesn't just give us courage, right, when we ask for it. So, right, so we could go deep into talking about prevention further, but that's going to be episode 2, like how to really transcend it completely. And the one, real recommendation I have in that direction, if you don't want to wait, you really want to jump the gun, look at where your thoughts, words, and deeds are coming from. If they're based in fear, you're probably going to be experiencing anxiety. If they're consistently based in fear, you're consistently avoiding, procrastinating, not facing what we know deep down we need to be doing or facing. You're probably going to be experiencing anxiety in some way, shape, or form. That's a very, very oversimplified approach to it, but something to start thinking about before next week. Jessica, as always, thank you so much. Any final thoughts, recommendations, anything?
I would just tell people, if listening and they're experiencing some anxiety, just try some of the tools that we discussed in today's podcast and see if it helps, see if it works. And again, you don't know unless you try. So might sound a little out of the norm or out of ordinary, but give it a go and see if it helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't forget to check out our websites, www.unleashpotentiallifecoaching.com or www.thecentermentor.com. We are both happy to work with you. We want to help. I have people who have come to me and just set up kind of accountability for themselves to take action towards empowering themselves to overcome their anxiety. Let's put it that way. And after 1 or 2 sessions, they know exactly what they need to be doing, rather than, the goal of just coming to session and exploring it and understanding it for years before taking action. Some people just want to take action and transcend it. And you can. For what it's worth, you can. We can help you do it. All right, guys.
Absolutely.
Check in next week. Have a great day.